What's going on, guys? In this video I'm going to talk about manual mode versus aperture mode. There seems to be confusion, misconception out there that manual mode is the only correct mode to take pictures, and that is not true at all. People need to understand how your light meter in your camera works. Okay, so I already have a video on manual exposure. If you haven't seen it, please watch that, and I'll put a link as well. Alright, so in your camera you have your light meter. There's one light meter, and that when you use manual mode, when you use aperture mode, it's the same light meter that's going to calculate the light that is bouncing off of your subject, and based on that it's going to tell you the exposure. Okay, so watch this quick clip on your manual versus aperture, and then I'll talk about more, when I use aperture mode, when I use manual mode. Alright, so let me show you guys this example and what the light meter is going to tell us in manual mode and in aperture mode. So right now my camera is set on manual mode, and let me just go in my viewfinder. Alright, so in manual mode, this is what the light meter is telling me. It's telling me it's going to be underexposed right now because it's on the negative side. So I'm going to slow my shutter speed down so I can bring the bar to 0, and that's when it will balance the exposure. Okay, so 1/80th, and you could tell that bar is moving because as the light is changing, it's really that sensitive. So it's saying that 1/80th of a second is basically, it's going to balance your exposure. Okay, so 1/80th f1.8 ISO 800, right? That's just as an example, random example. Let's switch it to aperture and see what kind of shutter speed we get. And in aperture, the camera will pick the shutter speed automatically for you. In manual, I have to basically move my shutter speed dial to bring this bar to 0, and now it's saying 80. Let's see what happens in aperture mode. Manual. Aperture. Just going to refocus. 1/80th of a second. Exact same shutter speed. So whether you're in manual mode or aperture mode, it's the same light meter. You're going to get the same reading every single time. Alright, so you saw that in the clip that you're going to get the same shutter speed. You're going to get the same exposure whether you're in manual mode or you're in aperture mode. That's what the camera light meter is calculating. Okay, so in manual mode, the difference is that you physically have to move your dial to balance the exposure, to bring that bar to 0. In aperture, it's done for you automatically. The camera just quickly calculates it. Instead of telling you, do this, physically do this, it just does it for you. So the question is, if aperture mode is doing everything for you, then why should people use manual mode? Well, number one, if you are shooting indoors using a speed light, you have to use manual mode. There's no other way around. You can't use aperture mode indoors with speed light, because as soon as you turn on your speed light, your shutter speed is going to be 1/60th of a second. It may not be the correct speed. If you go by the minimum shutter speed, it's not going to be correct anyway. So when I am shooting indoors and I'm using any type of flash, it is always manual mode. But outdoors, when the lighting is not tricky, a cloudy day, where my light meter is not getting tricked, it's not getting confused, I'm going to use aperture. I'm going to use aperture mode simply because it does the work for me. I don't have to move the dial while I am composing. So sometimes what happens is that if you are in manual mode, you're trying to move the dials to bring that bar to 0, and at this time you could be messing up your composition. And keep in mind that the longer you hold the camera like this, especially with a heavy lens, the more camera shake you're going to have. So if you're trying to balance this for, I don't know, a good 4 or 5 seconds, and then you're trying to compose a shot at the same time, your hand could be, your arms could be tired by now. I mean, it all depends on each individual, obviously. But what's going to happen is that when you actually take the picture, it may have a little bit of camera shake and your picture's going to be soft or blurry. So if the lighting is fine outdoors, if it's a cloudy day, even if it's a sunny day and you are shooting in a shaded area, use your aperture mode. Look at the exposure. If your light meter is not getting tricked and you're getting the correct exposure, stick with it. Stick with your aperture mode. And sometimes when the light meter does get tricked, even in aperture mode, you have this thing called exposure compensation. You can quickly adjust your shutter speed through exposure compensation. I've done a video on that as well, and I'll post a link as well. So don't be afraid to use aperture mode. It does not make you any less of a photographer. It's just like saying that drivers who use automatic transmission, they're not good drivers or they don't know how to drive. That is not true. So aperture mode is just semi-automatic. The camera is going to pick the shutter speed for you, but if the shutter speed is correct, then there's no reason why you have to force yourself to shoot in manual and constantly watch that bar. Again, shooting indoors with a speed light is different. When you're shooting with a speed light, with a flash, you're not constantly changing your shutter speed. If I'm going to take a picture here with the speed light, it's going to give me the same exposure in this area. But outdoors, it could be tricky depending on how the light is reflecting off of your subject. So I hope this helped. Please, if you are shooting in manual and you're having difficulty balancing the exposure, try aperture mode and see how this works out, right? Hope all is well, and I'll see you guys soon.